All right, recording. Welcome everyone to the Colorado Broadband Office webinar on understanding the FCC map and the challenge process. Our goal here is to help you understand the process so that you can participate and help get the word out. There we go. I'll go over a few logistics before we get started. One, this webinar is being recorded. We'll post everything to our website. Everyone should be muted as they enter the meeting, so please remain muted to avoid any background noise. And then we'll have a Q&A session at the end. We're trying to leave plenty of time for that. During that time, you can come off mute and ask questions. You can also put questions into the chat at any time during the webinar. A quick overview of the agenda for today. We're going to talk about the FCC map. We'll talk about how to use it, how to download and use the data, and then we'll get into the overview of the challenges. We'll talk about types of challenges and how to submit them. And finally, we'll share a few action items before we jump into the Q&A session. And I want to do a quick introduction of our team members so you can put some faces to the names. I'm Megan Gernert. I am the manager of the Broadband Data Program. Christy Ganser is our Data and Communications Manager. Adam Nazarian and Colin Schulte are GIS technicians, and Holly Straley is our GIS developer. Next slide. Now I'll hand it off to Christy to get us started.
Thank you, Megan. So this first portion of our presentation today, I'm going to provide an overview of the FCC map, and I will be going through why the map is important, a timeline of the funding of the map and of the challenge process, what's on the map and what's not on the map, a breakdown of the data found on the map, and then from there, my team will move on to discuss, how to use the map, the downloading of the data, accessing the fabric, and then we'll get into how to challenge the map. Next slide, please. So what is the FCC map and why is it so important? On November 18th, the FCC released its pre-production draft of the National Broadband Map. This map displays location level data on broadband availability throughout the country as submitted by internet service providers. This version of the first release of the map will offer users an opportunity to challenge the data submitted by providers in an ongoing basis in order to improve the quality of the overall data set. And then why is this so important? The accuracy of this map is crucial. Funding allocations for the $42.5 billion in BEAD grants to states will rely on the number of unserved locations as shown on the map, so we have to get this right. Next slide, please. Here we can see a timeline of key dates for funding and for the map and for the challenge process. The FCC released the map on November 18th. And for the next section there, the FCC is accepting challenges on a rolling basis, but they do recommend submitting challenges by January 13th of next year in order for the data to be incorporated into the data set that they will be using for the funding allocations for BEAD. And then finally, the NTIA plans to announce state BEAD allocations by June 30th of next year based on the most up-to-date FCC map. Next slide. Thank you. So what data is available on the map? The Broadband Serviceable Location Fabric displays location level points that identify buildings or structures such as a home or an apartment building or small business where internet services are or they could be available. The map also features availability data. ISPs must file data with the FCC twice a year on where they offer mass market internet service, utilizing the various technologies listed here, using their own broadband network facilities. For this map, the availability data is current as of June 30th, 2022. Fixed service providers must use the Fabric to report their service availability data. This means that they can only report locations that are in the current version of the Fabric as served. And then on the other hand, mobile service is reported based on coverage polygons. Next slide. To further explain what's on the map, we'd like to clarify the terms mass market and availability. For mass market, the FCC is only mapping locations that can receive mass market service. This means that entities like schools and hospitals will not be included on the map, but they do show up as a gray dot. And then for availability, this is basically everywhere that an ISP offers broadband services and can be referred to as available service or advertised service as well. Next slide. And then this slide talks about what's not on the map. As mentioned in the previous slide, mass market does not include enterprise services. And in fact, it's the Fabric itself that distinguishes between serviceable locations and non-serviceable locations. So for example, if a school is categorized in the Fabric dataset as a non-serviceable location, a provider cannot even report service for that location. In order to report service, they would have to first challenge the designation of non-serviceable location for the school in the Fabric, and then report it later as served in later data collection cycles. And then since the FCC is only showing availability data, this means that everything else is not included. So as long as the provider can install service at the location, then they can report it as served. So therefore, if you can purchase the service, then the service is available. So this means that it does not matter if you don't receive the promised speeds or if your monthly cost is unaffordable. And we'll talk more about this later in the presentation when we get into the challenge details. And from here, I'll pass it over to Colin and he'll go over how to use the map.
Thank you so much, Christy. Yeah, we're gonna go through some kind of ways to use the map and how to look at it and get some context to it. So this is the FCC homepage of the broadband map. This can be found at broadbandmap.fcc.gov. And here we can see we have a search address, location, providers, and area, as well as download, which Adam will go through later on today. We're going to start off by kind of talking about the location information and go through what the options there are and what kind of things we can find. So I actually have an example address I'm going to use, but if you don't have an address, you can pop in like a town or a city or something else to kind of try and find the area that you're looking for. So we're going to go here, and you can see there's a drop down with suggested addresses or any information that you might be looking for potentially. So here we go. We're going to zoom to this address, and you can see it did not select the correct one exactly. So we're going to click on the right address here. On the right-hand side, we do have the option of looking at mobile broadband or fixed broadband, but today we're going to focus on the fixed broadband aspects of this stuff. So first off, we can see here we have a lot of provider information, speeds down and up, as well as we can do a little drop down and see some additional information or doing business as names. Another option we have on the right side here is clicking this wheel, and we can find fixed broadband settings. And here we can see when it was updated. We can select business or residential. We can go through different technologies that are available. So for example, let's go all terrestrial and greater than 1,100. And this changed quite a bit, didn't it? So we can see down here that the map legend covers different types of points that we'll see. If it is green, that means that area is served and there's coverage available. If it's red, that means that it's not served or there is not that coverage available at that location. Gray dots, some of them you can see down here, are going to show up as a not mass market location, which Christy covered in her definitions. Additionally, on the left-hand side, we can go through and look at different layers here. We can change the base maps to different versions, satellite, street light, and street to dark, as well as looking at the location challenges. And if we click on one of the location challenges, we can see what information is there. So what type of challenge has been submitted for that location, the date, as well as the status of it. And that can only happen when we're at zoom level 15 or greater. If we go out beyond 15, we can see that this changes over to the hexagon patterns, which Adam's going to cover a little bit more detail. But these hexagons are going to be an aggregate of that area, and it's going to kind of encompass what information is inside of that spot. Next, we're going to move over to provider detail. And there are two ways to get to that. We can click on these tabs here, or we could go through the home page and click on providers. And this will show the national coverage of that provider. So let's go, for example, let's go to Lumen Technologies, and let's just select their copper. And again, they give you different drop downs here for different selections. And we'll click save, and we'll see some information get populated on the map. First off, we have the speeds that we're looking at. So again, if we go into this filter, we can go through and we can see when it was updated, business or residential, the speeds that are being applied to this area. So let's bump it up to 120. And we can see that information changes there. Going a little closer here, we can see that just based off the FCC data, what has been updated there. You can see different coverage areas. And since we're Colorado, we'll zoom in a little bit to Colorado. We can also make the visibility toggleable off or on, just to make that easy. If you have multiple providers in there, it would be, or different technologies, you can kind of filter out that way. And if we wanted to zoom in more and we said, oh, you know what, I actually want to look at the national again, you can click the view nationwide and it'll bring you back out to the national map. Next, we have area summaries. And area summary is going to be a geographic area. So on this drop down, we can go and look up by state, county, congressional district, census places, tribal areas, and CBSA, which is a statistical area. Don't ask me too much about that. Not super clear on it, but you can type in different information there and it'll give you suggestions as well. And again, we do have filters here. So we can look at any wired, terrestrial, all wired, or any technology. And we can change the speeds as well. And you'll notice that this graph did not change. It only changes once we go into a more refined geographic location. So if we go into Colorado, we'll see that these bars are updated to better reflect and represent what we're looking at. You can also see that there's another map, which will show the top 10 providers in that designated area. So again, if we went down one level further, we might see a difference in what providers are available as the bars populate. So will these ones. And the last one is going to be the data download. And I'm going to hand that off to Adam here. And he will take you through how to do the data downloads. But I do want to summarize kind of what we've talked about very briefly. We looked at how to view location summaries, researching provider details, area summaries, applying the filters, and navigating through the map. So Adam, why don't you take it away?
All right. Hi, guys. My name is Adam Nazarian. I'm also a GIS technician out here, and I'm going to be discussing about how to download the data availability or service availability data and bring it in to software to use the data, maybe to do statistics or do some just more heavy duty thing than the graphical user interface that the FCC provides on their map. On their data page, at least for our applications, downloading the data by state we found was the most useful. They are separated by transmission technology between cable, DSL, fiber, 2 different satellite options, 2 different fixed wireless options. And what you do after you download those individual CSV files, you'll get essentially kind of an Excel sheet of, for every location in the state, what is the fastest speed that each individual provider can offer with that technology. One thing to note is these CSVs are very, very large. Since multiple providers could be at an individual location, you could have anywhere up to a couple of million of points in these files. So you're going to want to bring it into a different type of software because Excel can't handle that much data. We are working on separating these fixed broadband availability data out by county so that it's a little more digestible, but we'll let you know about that as we get the data processed. Could go to the next slide here. Cool. So yeah, when you download that, each individual row in the data set is going to have a federal registration number for who's offering the service, a provider ID, which is something kind of analogous, a brand name. Importantly, there's going to be a location ID, which corresponds to which house it is. There will be the technology code for what the service is, the speeds that are available, whether or not it's low latency, whether it's a business, residential, or both, which state that it's in. And then another important thing for geography here is what census block the location is located in and what hex 8 the location is inside of. And a hex 8 is a hexagon that's about a little over half a mile wide. So how can we use this? Or what do those three kind of geography indicators let you know? First off, if you have access to the fabric in an area, I would definitely go by the location level. So that's going to be the best for in-depth mapping. But if you don't have access to that location ID to link a dot to a service level, you can also aggregate this data to census block, which is going to be much more powerful in urban areas, or the hex data, which is going to be much more powerful in rural areas. Next, I wanted to remind people, when you download both the fabric and this availability data, it's in a CSV, which is just kind of a Excel sheet, very bland data type. You're going to want to bring this into software that can handle this. If you're a person who pays for ArcGIS or has a team that pays for ArcGIS or a contractor or something like that, I've included a YouTube video there on how to take a CSV and move it to dots on a map. The FCC also released a tutorial of how to do this in free software. And there's a timestamp on that second video there that'll take you directly into the video where they start talking about mapping the data. And for both of these, you're definitely going to want to set your coordinate system to that WGS 84. Otherwise, your dots might shift around the map a little bit. But once you've followed those tutorials and you've gotten those dots on your map, now we can talk about how you join the availability data, which is represented on the left here. If I'm someone who is interested, I don't have access to the fabric, and I'm someone who's interested in urban areas, I will definitely want to link my availability data, which is on the left there, to a data set from the census that tells you what census block we're in. And if you do a join, you might get overlapping shapes. If you do a relate, you can click on the map and it'll let you know what providers are in that area once you process the data. If you are someone who's in more of a rural area, or you're interested in a rural area and you don't have access to the fabric, I would definitely look into downloading that hex data for Colorado and link the hex 8 number there to the H3 index field of that GIS data. And that'll give you kind of a better rural representation of the fabric and help you run statistics. Finally, if you have access to the fabric, you can link those location IDs, and that'll be a much better process in terms of, if you look at the bottom there, there's a latitude and longitude. So you'll literally be able to say, this is the location and this is the service. And I'm going to hand it off to Megan here about licensing, kind of a reminder of how to get access to the fabric if you're someone who's certified to be able to do that.
Great, thank you, Adam. So as Adam just talked about, there's a lot you can do if you have access to the fabric. So I'm going to go over how you can get access. So the FCC contracted with CostQuest for the creation of the fabric. Therefore, a license agreement is required with CostQuest in order to access. That license agreement is free, but just know that there are limitations on how you can use the data. My two biggest pieces of advice here are, one, get the process started. If you want access to the data, start the process now. They're dealing with a lot of license requests, so it might take some time to get the agreement executed and get the data delivered. So the sooner you start, the sooner you can get your hands on that data. And two, make sure you understand the terms of a license agreement. We want to make sure that you know what you are and are not allowed to do with that data. It's a pretty restrictive agreement, so just make sure you understand what you're allowed to do. Before anyone asks, the CBO is not allowed to share fabric data because we also had to sign a restrictive license agreement to access that data. So in the table down here, I have an overview of what types of license agreements there are. And I don't know the difference in the terms between the different tiers of license agreement. So please work with CostQuest to understand what you can access. But what I do know is that service providers and governmental entities can access versions of the Tier 2 agreement. Providers will receive data that encompasses their service area, and governments will receive data for their jurisdiction. The Tier 4 agreement is relatively new. It was announced a couple weeks ago, and my understanding is that you can request a specific geographic area when you request your license. And then on the bottom here, I have links for how to go through that process for different entities. So we'll share out these slides after the webinar, and you can access those links. So now I'm going to jump into the challenge process. First, I want to reiterate that the FCC does not have challenge deadlines. Everything is accepted on a rolling basis. All of those deadlines you hear about are the NTIA recommendations, like Christy mentioned earlier. There's 3 types of challenges, and I'll get into more detail on the following slides, but those 3 are location, fixed availability, and mobile availability. For location challenges, this is for when the data in the fabric is incorrect. So if a location is missing, you can add it to the fabric. If data for a location is incorrect, like the address is wrong or the unit count is wrong, you can submit a challenge to change those. You can move the placement of a point. So if it's not within the building footprint, you can move it so that it's in the right spot. Also not on this list, you can remove points from the fabric if it's not a building or if it's not a BSL. BSL is broadband serviceable location. I'll say that a lot in the next few minutes. All right, fixed availability challenges. This one can get a bit confusing, but the most important thing to remember is that the data is availability data. So you can't challenge anything about the quality of the service. It's really about whether you can purchase the service at a certain location. So if a provider says the service is not available, or if they won't sell it to you, or if they fail to install service or request more than a standard installation fee, those are things you can challenge. If you purchase the service and you aren't receiving the promised speeds, or the service keeps dropping, those are not grounds for a challenge. And then lastly, the mobile challenge is pretty straightforward. And we won't dive too deep into mobile coverage and challenges here, but you can basically just download the FCC speed test app and submit an official challenge through that app. They do accept bulk submissions as well, but our office is not very familiar with that. So I've included a link to the specifications, and so you can visit that and follow those specifications. All right, so now we'll get into how to submit challenges. First, I'll go over the individual challenges, and then we'll jump into the bulk filings. I'm going to attempt to do a demo here of the mapping interface. So I had a link that just zooms into this address I want to look at. This is in Glenwood Springs, which I chose because that's my hometown. So let's start with some location challenges. The handy thing about the map is that the options change based on the location you have selected. So let's say I want to click on this little gray dot. I don't know how well you guys can see that. Let me zoom in. So if I click on this gray dot, gray means it's not a mass market location. So when you look at this side panel, I don't have any service availability information. Let me get my pointer to do a little spotlight. So there's no availability information over here because it's not a mass market location. But what I can do is a location challenge. So if I click this link over here for location challenge, I can see that it's an enterprise location. And when I click on the category code, I only have one option, and that's to change the building type from enterprise to something else. So if I want to say this is a business, I would fill out my information, select business, provide any documentation or evidence that I have, click this box to certify that I'm telling the truth, and submit the challenge. The other thing you can do if you're challenging a location that is a mass market location, you have a few more options in the location challenge, and then I'll show the availability challenge as well. But when I click the location challenge here, I have a lot more options in the dropdown. So if I want to say this address you have listed here for this building is incorrect, I can select incorrect location address. I fill out the correct address, provide any evidence, and submit that challenge. Other options I can do, and when you select one of these options, the form will ask you for whatever information it needs. So if I change this to say this is not a serviceable location, like for example, this location we're looking at is county courthouse. So I could say this is not a serviceable location because it doesn't need mass market broadband. This is a government building, So I select from this drop-down list that popped up, provide my documentation and evidence, and submit the challenge. So I'll close out of that. The last thing I want to show you is adding a location. So let's say this is a building that needs to be added. You can just click on a point, and this little pop-up will show up. You click challenge location, and it brings up the pop-up again. You only have this one option to add a missing location. If I decide that I put this point in the wrong spot, I can move it around in this view. And then I need to add all of the information I know about this location. So the address, the unit count, the building type, and provide any evidence that that is necessary for that challenge. I'll close out of that and go back to this one. So to do an availability challenge, first you have to have a mass market location selected on the map. And then you go over and you have your list of providers here. So let's say I'm at this location and I call up Comcast and say, can you provide me cable services? And they say, sorry, we don't serve that location. What I would do is click availability challenge. I want to challenge Comcast. I want to click this send my challenge to the selected provider. That creates an official challenge. If you do this other option, that's really just a way to provide feedback, and it doesn't require any sort of response from the provider. So if I scroll down, you fill out your information and you have a bunch of reasons here you can select from. So the provider does not offer the technology. So could be my challenge for this location because they told me it's not available. I describe my experience and upload, I could say, here's a screenshot of the email where they told me they can't provide the service. And then each, if you have a denied request for service, they'll ask you for the date and the method of request, those kinds of details. For everyone in this list that you want to challenge, you have to go through that process for each one. Okay, and I think that's it for the demo. So I'll jump back to the presentation. Okay, go a few screens ahead and jump into the bulk fabric filing. Hopefully everyone's still with me. All right, so for the bulk challenge, you'll need access to the fabric for this part because you need to know what you're looking at. I would also stress that you should really take some time to make sure you understand all of the definitions and codes. This is just to ensure that you are submitting valid challenges. If you're not following a methodology that the FCC views as a valid methodology, those challenges might be rejected. So I'd really stress that you understand that so that you're not wasting your own time submitting challenges that then get rejected in the future. When you're doing the actual submission, that's a CSV file upload into the broadband data collection system. My biggest advice is follow the data specification exactly. If you have any errors in your CSV file, the upload will fail. Trust me, this happens to me a lot. I've done a number of submissions and almost every time I get at least one fail. Evidence is required for your submission, but you do not need specific evidence for every single location. In the bulk fabric challenge, you can just upload your methodology for each category. So for example, for category 1, which is to add missing locations, you could say, we used a combination of data set X and Y to identify missing locations and then manually research each location to confirm. So it could be something as simple as that. And you can still include additional evidence for specific locations if you feel that's necessary. I won't go into much detail here, but basically you can track the status of submissions and challenges in the BDC system. CostQuest will be releasing a new version of the fabric every 6 months to coincide with each BDC filing. So that'll be sometime before December 31st, they'll release version 2 of the fabric. Anything that's not incorporated at that time will remain in the queue to be reviewed and incorporated into future versions. Next up is the bulk fixed availability challenge. So these use the same challenge codes that we saw earlier in the mapping interface dropdown. So like provider denied, request for service, those kinds of things. But you have a couple methodologies for submitting the bulk data. One is knowledge of infrastructure. So, you know, rights of way, franchise agreements, any information like that that you have, you can use to submit a fixed availability challenge. You can also collect information directly from consumers. This would basically be a list of, or this would basically be collecting everything that they would be submitting as an individual challenge, but you're collecting it from them and then submitting it in bulk. The third one is just a catch-all. Anything else, anything that doesn't fit in those first 2 categories, you can still do submissions. You just need to make sure you're following the rules and it's well documented and you provide detailed evidence. I'll admit we have not done any availability challenges yet. We've only done fabric challenges. So I don't have specific pointers here, but as always, follow the specs and provide your evidence. What happens after you submit a fixed availability challenge? Essentially, the FCC staff will review the challenge. It initiates a formal process. The provider has 60 days to respond. Basically, they'll either concede or rebut the challenge. If there is no resolution between the provider and the challenger, the FCC will adjudicate the challenge. And then those results will be on the map. All right, lastly, oops, sorry about that. Lastly is crowdsourced data. This is sort of a subset of fixed availability challenges, but because those are so strict, the FCC provides this option of crowdsourced data to allow for collecting information on the quality of service. So you'll have the same list of challenge codes in the crowdsourced data, except you're allowed to use category 7, which basically says the actual speed does not meet the advertised speed. And that means you can use speed test data to support your crowdsource submission. Evidence is optional, but highly encouraged. I think the more information you can provide, the better. But the main difference between crowdsourced data and the fixed availability challenge is really in how the data is treated after you submit it. So we just saw that a challenge requires a response from the provider and a resolution. The crowdsourced data does not. The data will be shared with the provider, but they don't have to respond. And the FCC may use the data to identify patterns of inaccurate or incomplete data, but it's my understanding that the challenger likely won't hear back from the FCC on a crowdsourced submission unless there are additional questions. All right, what's next? So the CBO wants to get as many challenges submitted as possible before January 13th, because that's what's going to affect the allocation of BEAD funding for our state. This part of the process really relies heavily on local knowledge, and that's where we're asking for all of your help. So ways that you can help are to get the message out in your communities. We're working on some outreach materials to help you share that information. So keep an eye out for that in the follow-up email that we send after the webinar. For the ISPs on the call, if you're getting questions from your customers, you can really help out this effort by sending them to the FCC map or directing them to the CBO with additional questions. We're happy to help them out with navigating this process. And then for anyone who is able to, has the time and the expertise to dig through the data, we encourage you to participate in the bulk challenge process. You know your area best, so you can review the map in your area, download the data and explore, and use your local knowledge to submit challenges. I know it's not the best time of year for outreach, but we're working with what we have. So reach out to us if you have any questions on how to help get the word out in your communities and your areas. Okay, that was a lot of talking. Let's get into the Q&A session.
Hey, Megan, we had an opening question here in the chat. I would have loved to answer it via text, but I actually haven't looked at the submitted challenges data. J. Randolph Luning asked, can you say something about downloading the status of location challenges? Do you only get your own set of challenges or all of the challenges? Is it geographically bounded, state or national? Or is there a link to download the Fabric challenges?
Okay. Hi, Randy. How are you? So in the BDC system, your options for download are only for your challenges. I don't think they have a method for downloading, let's say, like all challenges in Colorado or anything like that. You can view those on the map like Colin was demonstrating earlier, but to my knowledge, there's no way to download those unless they're challenges that you submitted.
I believe you're correct, Megan. I tried to find some supporting documentation on that, and the only stuff available for download by the state at the FCC broadband map would be any like availability data, not challenge information.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll link that PDF here in a minute.
Okay. Looks like Scott has his hand up. You want to go ahead, Scott?
Hey Megan, how's it going?
Good.
Appreciate the info. The gray dot. I'm a little confused and looking for a little additional information. I heard mass market service and I heard broadband serviceable location. I don't know if those are two different things or the different acronyms for the same thing. And then I'm interested in getting definitions and understanding better what that is. I'm looking at something in my vicinity of 7 or 8 businesses and grocery store, hotel, restaurant, gas station, bank, and it's like 5 out of 7 of them have, the green dots, the mass market location, and 2 of them are called, the non-mass market serviceable locations. And I'm like, where did Quest come up with this, and what is the real definition of this stuff?
Yeah, so the gray dots, I think let's see, the categories that'll show up as gray dots are enterprise, community anchor institution, and I think there's one more, group quarters, I think. Although no, that shows up as mass market, I believe. So it's basically just enterprise and community anchor institutions. So if your local McDonald's is showing up as a gray dot, that's because CostQuest has categorized most national chains as enterprise locations. So, like, even though it's a small location, it'll probably be listed as enterprise because it's a national chain, if that makes sense.
And is there an actual definition, like some verbiage somewhere associated with that I could read that you're aware of?
Yes. It can be hard to navigate their help site, but that information is there. We can probably dig that up for you and point you to the right places.
Okay, so
but there's some information in the specification. There's some information in like the FAQ. But from my experience, it's not all in the same place. So if you go to this about part of the map, there's a few links. But we can afterwards, after the webinar, we can find some of those resources for you.
Okay, no, I'd appreciate that. Thanks for the explanation.
Yeah, no problem. Craig, you have your hand up.
Hey, Megan. 2 questions. First for Colin, and then one for you. Colin, when you were doing the percent of units covered, you said to get it to update, you had to drill down. So when you applied the filter, you had all fixed on, but when you drilled down, the top providers still showed SpaceX and Hughes satellite. So it
Correct.
looks like stuff's not updating for the high level summaries. And that's kind of problematic because the only other way to get like a state level summary is if you had access to the state level fabric. So is there any wisdom on how to do that?
No, that's a great point. I actually did notice that as well. Megan, if you hit the next page on the graph there. Yeah, that one. You'll see that the satellite providers are always going to be a high percentage of served just because of the coverage that they claim to have and everything of that sort. And even if you apply the filter to a higher speed, it's not going to be representative. So you are correct there that it is a little wonky, and I think that's something we might want to bring up to the FCC, to be honest, is one of their talks, because it should be updating based on what the filters applied there. So it's kind of weird that it doesn't do it.
Yeah, and same for if you wanted to apply the filters for a specific program, for example, BEAD, where you have a non-eligible broadband technology like satellite or unlicensed fixed wireless, you could deselect them, but then you can't actually see what would be BEAD applicable for percent of locations because it doesn't flow through.
Yeah, it's a bit limited in that sense, unfortunately. But if you downloaded the data directly, you'd be able to kind of figure out that coverage information.
Okay.
Does that answer? Sorry, I know it's kind of a short response to a very good question, but it is in there. It would just have to be manipulated through you or your services personally, you know?
Yeah, it's just a whole lot more involved than if they actually had it responsive to the filters.
Yeah, nothing's
okay,
easy.
No, I'm good. And Megan, on the point about getting the word out or the outreach for the bulk challenges, whether fabric or availability, does Colorado have a plan for availability challenges ahead of the January kind of date? I know neighboring states are looking at updating certainly the 25.3 for availability kind of aggressively, because it ends up being competition for the formula-based BEAD allocation and getting that number right. So are we going to have a proactive plan to do that, or kind of leave it as best efforts?
So with the short timeline, it's hard to, have a real concerted effort. What we're planning to do is use the data that we have to identify areas that we're seeing inconsistencies. So, if we identify that a certain town has some data that doesn't look right, we're probably going to reach out to that town and say, can you help us with this process? You have the local knowledge to be able to submit these challenges because they do require so much detail. We could submit crowdsourced data pretty easily in a lot of those places, but we're concerned that if we're not submitting official challenges, that won't be considered for the BEAD allocation. So we want to try to get as many official challenges as possible. And I think the, city, county governments can help with bulk challenges, and they can help us reach out to the residents of their areas. Like homeowners associations might be really helpful in getting specific neighborhoods covered. Small ISPs like yours, I think, if a lot of your area is reported as covered and you have evidence that you can provide to refute that, we would love for you to submit bulk challenges and reach out to the residents in your area to have them submit challenges as well. So it's not like we don't have an answer really. It's just, kind of best efforts and seeing what we can get done in this amount of time.
All right, thank you.
All right, I'm gonna call on Jacob. I know there's a lot of stuff in the chat, but let's get to Jacob first.
Hi, thanks. My question's on the data download. I haven't found any way to download any locations that are completely unserved, so no provider has reported availability. Has anyone else seen that or encountered that? Do you know of a way to do that?
You might be able to compare the geosynchronous satellite download to the various other technologies as a way to find the ones that weren't even submitted with a 0, 0 terrestrially. The ones that are absolutely not submitted are all community anchor institutions.
Okay. So does the satellite providers have 100% coverage? Is that what they're saying?
At least reported at 0, 0. You can submit a report of 0, 0 if you're below a certain threshold. So.
Okay.
Yeah, but yeah, I think you'd have to have access to the full statewide fabric in order to really do what you're asking, Jacob.
Okay, that's kind of what I thought. I just wanted to make sure I hadn't missed something and someone else found a clever way to do it. Thank you.
All right, so I'll try to get through some of the ones in the chat. And I know we only have a couple minutes left. We can stick around for a few minutes after 3 o'clock if people want to. We'll record through the end of Q&A and post that on the website. All right. Can you say something about the motivation for submitting various types of challenges? States are interested in identifying unserved locations by the January deadline since it impacts BEAD allocations. What are the other motivations for submitting challenges? That's a really tough question, Randy. I think I might want to answer that one offline after I've had some time to think about it. We can include that in our follow-up email. Because we're kind of laser focused on the BEAD allocation at the moment. But you know, there's a lot of things to consider there.
I also wanted to take a second, Megan, to remind people that we do have access to NTIA and FCC meetings. And so any questions that we don't have answers for at the moment, we're going to go find out for you guys. We have office hours that we can attend, and we're happy to, you know, ask in your stead and everything and try to get more answers and more information as we go on through this process.
Thanks, Colin. All right, it looks like there's a second to Scott's question about the gray dots. Yeah, and I think, Seth, those are great things to challenge if you have the knowledge and the capacity to do so. Most of what we've been focused on with our challenges is finding missing locations and correcting unit counts. But there are a lot of locations that are marked as non-broadband serviceable locations that should probably that designation should probably be changed on a lot of them. So if you have good examples, those would be great challenges to submit. Okay, did I miss anything in the chat? I haven't really been fully monitoring it.
Yeah, we just got one in. Can we talk about why folks might find value in using crowdsourced data with hexagons in rural areas? And Adam, I think you might want to take that one, to be honest. I think you've been kind of doing some research on it.
Yeah, I was super enthusiastic about, oh, Hex8 data, cool. And then in talking to a person at Esri and chit-chatting, he was like, well, the average census block is actually 0.1 square miles. So it's actually 7 times less granular. So really you would want to focus on that Hex8 data when the census blocks in your area are larger than 0.7 square miles, which would be definitely more rural areas.
Great, thanks, Adam. All right, Colin, did we miss any more?
I got to
If
unmute, but I
not-
think we're caught up at the moment.
Okay.
I don't see anything else that we missed. If so, we do have the chat recorded.
Okay. Yeah, and if anyone else wants to pipe up with a last minute question, now's your chance. Otherwise, we will sign off and end the webinar and send you the recording as soon as it's ready. Will you have a PDF version? Yes, we will share the slides as a PDF as well.
Those will have the hyperlinks in them for you too.
Yes. Okay, last chance. All right, well, thank you everyone for joining. Hopefully we shed some light on this complicated process. And please reach out if you do have any questions afterwards. All right, thank you everyone.
Guys.